Very humbling to see all this fantastic research. And so I'm not going to talk about much work and about architecture. I was kind of seduced to pick up on the theme of the conference. So keen to work on a new topic I haven't talked about. So it's kind of talking to the raw a little bit. I use you as guinea pigs to think through what this might mean in terms of cyborg futures, and it's the work looked at through the lens of what it means for aesthetic and moral sensibilities. We are challenged with new forms of subjectivity through this, I think, and the cyborg is obviously a metaphor primarily, and that's also the way Donna Haraway had introduced it as a metaphor for opening up what human nature might be into the future. And I think not only in terms of how we attach new pieces to ourselves and performance-enhancing chips and prostheses, but the way the built environment which we surround ourselves with, as well as the world of objects, becomes alien and strange and exploratory and challenges our sensibility of what it means to be human and to push that forward. So that's what I'm trying to talk to. I mean, here I'm mostly preaching to the choir, but out there in the world there's a lot of sensibilities to be overcome, which hold us back, including aesthetic sensibility, which we should be interested in as designers. And I did like a lot of the communications before, and I thought it was interesting, one of the diagrams, the relation between engineering and design being on the level of human experience, and I agree with that. It's the human element, the experiential aspect, which is the designer's aspect, but this one isn't preconceived. This one is evolving and to be pushed forward through us as well, to offer new experience which might not be recognized immediately as already human. Maybe they're superhuman. So this starts with the recognition that all of this, of course, is driven by performance, and that where performance leads us, there we should follow. Performance in the end means material freedom, prosperity, charity, and a better life for all. But it is challenging, and it's obviously fascinating that these prostheses mean that we actually can move faster and run faster than with normal legs. So that's quite of an interesting challenge. But also, I think, as you can see with the little image on the top right, this is challenging our aesthetic sensibilities. Something has been shifted up in terms of the image. Okay, now there's something to do with, I think this is my system, which is off target. Maybe it's a resolution issue. Duplicate. Yeah.
Maybe if it doesn't work.
It would be great to duplicate it onto the screen. Duplicate. Better. Great, thanks. Wow, he knows what he's doing. So our task is, of course, to engineer this, to imagine this, to think about the human potentials, but then also to initiate the new sensibilities and deliver the aesthetic revolutions. By making these new possibilities compelling and tying in with this sensibility. So, and my theory of beauty says beauty is a promise of performance, which we can obviously appraise ahead of being acted out, but we are conditioned to recognize and be drawn to the high performance and be conditioned to understand this to be something which appeals to us. But as historical conditions of performance change, aesthetic values must change. So maybe our sensibilities are shifting at the moment from the left to the right, and we find this kind of obscene and ecologically kind of burdensome, and we start to maybe find beauty more on the right-hand side. Because there's a different set of performance criteria becoming important, and I think Google, for instance, also recognizes where it wants to tie in with its kind of autonomous car. And so we have to recognize the historical relativity of ideals of beauty, and we can't rest with them. And this is also the historical relativity of conceptions of what is humane, human, and our kind of open-ended nature. So in architecture, you see this progression. And it has to do with both the conditions of life and the opportunities of new forms of life. So this kind of spirit of the Superman you'll find in Nietzsche, and I've always been drawn to this. And so he's talking about the revaluation of our values, particular moral values, but they closely connect to aesthetic sensibilities also. Moral and aesthetic sensibilities need to be adjusted. And so Nietzsche saying, I teach you the Superman, man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? I mean, we're working on this here, I think. All beings so far have created something beyond themselves, and do you want to be the ebb of this great flood? Let your will say the Superman shall be the meaning of the earth. So I think that's an invitation to push forward, and this is also his kind of absorption and conclusion from recognizing evolution through Darwin's works 2 decades earlier, and what that might mean for cultural and human evolution. So we could talk about design as second nature, but we could also talk about and that this second nature which evolved and is created by designers is radically different from everything we have seen in the built environment. This goes through the totality of the design disciplines, from urban design and to architecture, interior design, products, the world of artifacts, also the totality of the built environment, world of artifacts, which we collectively as design professionals are responsible for shaping and reshaping. I think we're up for a total transformation once more of the physiognomy of the built environment, the world of objects. And this is some hints of this. So design means also, a certain extent, an anti-nature, and I will talk later about anti-humanism, because we can't naturalize this condition. This is something to be discovered. We're learning a lot from the way nature has produced unpredictably and ever other, the endless forms of nature. But our traditional conception of nature is kind of usually still the Aristotelian of essences and stability and eternal reproduction of what is considered to be natural types. And that needs to be rejected. So it depends on the conception of nature, whether it's an anti-nature or second nature, and continuous evolution of nature. And I think this connection of cyborg to Superman comes at the very beginning, when the term was first brought forward. Cyborg, cybernetic organism, the evolution of the Superman. And that's on the agenda here. And I think artists have been exploring this for quite a while. This is stellar, and also the connection to evolution and an artificial second evolution, if you like. And art is important in the sense that it delivers a revolution in aesthetic sensibilities for us. So we start to accept that potential and recognize ourselves as open-ended, evolving, and in these kind of contraptions and structures as the potential of a human condition. Of course, these things are not functioning, but they're opening up the space of sensibilities. And we should have very few preconceptions, and it's a hard one to swallow. And there is this theory of Deleuze and Guattari of the assemblage in the body without organs. If we continuously can add pieces, maybe subtract, which the idea of the carbon legs shows, and also generate new human-machine, man to man and human to human, mediated through machine assemblages. The whole point is of this is an exploration, but in the end it's about performance in terms of an overall degrees of freedom. We come to the concept of freedom later. So cyborg is actually more than anything a metaphor here, and it was used by Donna Haraway in a famous Cyborg Manifesto from '84, opening up the space of identities, questioning gender stereotypes and calling for much more hybridized and fluid and open-ended forms of subjectivity and identity. This kind of future openness, and also realizing that the historical process throws up new challenges, new roles, new opportunities to self-transform. And for me, that's a very exciting project, the Nietzschean project still going on. Existentialism has a big role in this as well, pushing this. And again, you see the artist, the Dada movement, the great kind of destroyers of traditions, but also the explorers of new potentials, again, delivering the aesthetic sensibilities for that. Because none of this is functioning, but it's still an important role for these to play. And you have that preparing us for what's coming, and more and more coming, the kind of expansion of our senses, the brain plasticity allows for us to swap senses, so you can see through your tongue, through camera input. That surface of the tongue is very, very densely packed with sensors, and that becomes also available to non-handicapped, non-blind people in conditions, military conditions to begin with. But I think these aspects can translate further, and we can have additional sensory inputs. I've also seen a set of electrodes bringing vision through your whole back skin, and the brain can recompute it into an image, an orientation image. So these are things which at the moment are there to compensate handicaps, but they might as well be speed enhancement which become available for everybody. And that's where the tongue seeing is already happening with surgeons who are actually using tongue seeing to get more information when they do this. And night vision is also connected up with tongue vision, in fact. And the possibility, again, I think Braille is fascinating, and all languages, that they're totally artificial and arbitrary in many ways, and that we can get into them and get an enormous amount of communicative connections through any kind of input device, and invented patterning which represents information in various ways. So I'm fascinated with this, but also with the potential of having these chip implants to start doing a lot of the things you use your iPhone for directly with your hands and fingers and so on. I mean, it's a fascinating world, and it will change our physiognomy, maybe slightly, but we shouldn't be afraid of this. I mean, this has been always part of the human condition out of the animal kingdom, this kind of self-transformation, the creation of identities and multiple identities. A lot of this is semiology and social structure differentiation, but it's an absolute human universal. So becoming human from animal to the human condition is about this cultural evolution, which universally implies the self-transformation to establish new social roles, status groups, identities through design manipulation of the body, but also, of course, of the environment, which is operating semiologically. It's one of my key topics, which I'm just touching on and looking at. Some of the material usually goes through from a different angle. So again, Nietzsche talking about becoming human. What is the ape to man? A laughing stock or painful embarrassment? And man shall be just that for the Superman, looking back. And is that the Superman, or is it a laughing stock? And are we going to be the laughing stock of the next decade? If you look back at your pictures from the 1980s, you get very embarrassed about yourself. And also, if you look at the social mores and moral sensibilities of your grandfather's generation, 1950s, it is brutally embarrassing and dysfunctional. So we've moved on a lot, and we will move on a lot with respect to patterns of interaction in life. So we have aesthetic sensibilities migrating through, so what used to be beautiful becomes ugly, and on we go. And but also, this is not arbitrary with the fashion system. It fits into a kind of social matrix where we self-sort into, and at each stage we can kind of try to calibrate and recalibrate and learn about it, and we have an intuitive grasp of this, but this moves on decade by decade. And again, the pioneers of modernism, basically I think this lot and group, which are still, we feel very close to, the avant-gardes, and this is an avant-garde kind of forum here, has been exploring and been in love with new explorative ventures through technology. From day one, actually, the futurists were the kind of seminal experience with Marinetti taking a car ride in 1908, and this kind of the poetry and shock of self-transformation, and was for setting this off, I think, in terms of the avant-gardes. At the Bauhaus, at the Woutimas in Moscow, etc. And you can see here the kind of cyborg spirit at the Bauhaus in action. And even kind of old bourgeois gentleman like Walter Gropius was allowing himself to be thrusted into this kind of abstract Mondrianesque world, his office at the Bauhaus. Or something like the Rietveld House Schröder, this kind of strange abstract art world. And abstract art was this idea of an abstraction, the degrees of freedom to not being locked into a mimetic condition of what a house, what the family, what it is, but an abstract exploration of space and the formation of space. These abstractions held the engines of invention, of opening up, future open, unconstrained design invention, as it were, and to kind of project that forward into space by Kiesler. So we love these art into architecture, into real-life conditions, and I just throw this in as an inspiration, where we created this kind of Superman villa, and this is Mr. Superman, the owner of this, very boldly projecting a new life sensibility. All the other villas in that compound are these kind of neo-Renaissance monstrosities. And again, this comes in waves of progressive techno-optimism, and then kind of pessimism and retro investments, and we're in this kind of in this kind of wave of pessimism and retro investments, unfortunately, since the financial crisis, us excluded, but our discipline is moving this way. So I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think most of the discipline is kind of on a kind of ebbing, receding kind of trajectory. So we should look back at these inspirational moments in the 60s, where we had this kind of takeoff moment of radical exploration, Haus Rucker in Vienna, and again the kind of mentality of self-transformation, the cyborgish aspect of this becomes very evident in this. And I also love Werner Panton. And of course you have radical social transformation, you have the hippie movement, free love, the breakdown of lots of bourgeois order students taking over universities, the kind of stiff professors kind of having to become just one of the bodies of in an open discourse, and that shows up in these kind of psychedelic, also life enhancement through drugs, mind expansion. This is all kind of a wonderful era of exploration, and something like Werner Ponton expresses this in these kind of worlds where the social protocols are yet to be discovered and written into it, and there's a kind of exploration of collective self-transformation and discovery of potentials of interaction. And the kind of breakdown of typologies. The Bauhaus, you'll find the Vasily chair and the Corbusier's lounge and sofa. They're still typologically very strict, whereas here in the 60s you have the radical dissolution of typologies and these kind of playscapes and open-endedness, and much more inventiveness, if you like, at that point. Super studio, super wave, and I think fascinating, and to some extent our buildings kind of land equally kind of brutally, although we have the premise of contextual embeddedness as these kind of alien challenges to contemporary conditions. But it's all about the internal performance of connecting hundreds of startup companies. There's WeWork conditions and cafes, bars, restaurants spread out to this three-dimensional matrix, 3D interface of communication as a new kind of urban life component which we're looking at. And the kind of alien creatures, they're not alien for the sake of being alien at this point, they're actually delivering public space on a new level of integration in an urban texture. But again, going back to these kind of explorative, open, unscripted, less scripted, underdetermined surface is an important part of not only experimenting with form, but experimenting with the use cases of these forms. So I am subscribing, therefore, to this open exploration where we allow for things, form to program, and programming is something which is discovered in the confrontation with the alien, strange, new materials, new techniques, new forms, new technologies. Something which we generated in a number of conditions, using the art space as well to explore this. And I mean, Zaha was one of those cyborg kind of heroes, I think, who was also very much into a self-conscious projection of her persona and breaking through a lot of stereotypes of her culture and her gender, and always maintained that. And that connects back up her subjectivity and sensibility to the urge to reconfigure the planet in the image of new levels of complexity and dynamism, which she thought was where society was driving. And so we kept that up, and through integrating new media, new technologies and algorithms, and I also challenged with the kind of self-styling agenda, which fits with an urban agenda. So the fashion world is of interest because we're talking about subjectivity, sensibility, and to express that and to allow for that to be expressed. So we have opened our gallery to young artists, fashion designers, product designers, etc. to do that. And I think our buildings also attract a certain crowd and a certain milieu and certain sensibilities and the strangeness is stimulating, but also it is not just that. Once you in these spaces, you realize how they function, how they make sense, how you can move through them and gather and disperse elegantly across levels and across many venues, etc. I think it's important that these kind of visions early on in DRL were meant to be instrumentalized, and yes, there's this kind of strange new universe we sort of throw ourselves into, and yet these are high-performance work environments for corporate territories at that point. And this is the reality of a high-performance corporate territory in Moscow, for instance, or projecting forward to Hyundai headquarters in the last few years. I just wanted to share this with you as well, this kind of cyborg hotel. I just opened in Macau, and I just took this iPhone sequence from going up the elevator. And there's a kind of strangeness and excitement and the transparency and openness and 360-degree kind of porosity of experiencing a vertical street, which I find fascinating. Of course, when you deliver, they have to have something kind of where even the initial hostility, the same with the Dongdemon, and rejection of something alien and strange, when in its use, in its kind of engagement, becomes compelling and becomes kind of loved and adored, because there's certain advantages like the navigation and orientation capacity, bringing things into view, having ease of navigation. There are these propositions become accepted, and the aesthetics with that goes with that as a high performance space gets disseminated. So the exoskeleton allows for this incredible internal openness. There's no columnar structure between the two side towers' cores, so that internal fluidity, but also we have the imprinting of the character of the space into the rooms themselves, as well as the various public spaces. Internal visual depth and layeredness, including exterior vistas at any point. So there's another of those characters, I think, who's kind of boldly projecting forward Mark Fawns, and you see, you should be applauded. And again, this is initially in the art space, and I was having a discussion with Roland earlier. And then how do you push out then beyond that? Or you can also stay there and allow us to draw these repertoires and push them into a real world transformation. So we do that. We're very supportive of young startup companies and researchers and students. A show we had at our gallery called Meta Utopia, and again there's a whole new set of sensibilities. Last year I came here and launched the concept of tectonism at this conference actually, which is so different from the previous forms of parametricism. It's so much more diverse, rich, lawful, rigorous, but also becomes much more available. And I was pleased to hear Achim's team talk about the kind of low-cost potentials of this, where these things become attainable. Also, when I look at the stuff which is produced here by Philip, this stuff is coming. It's coming with a vengeance, and we need to explore its applicability. And we are at the cusp of transforming the built environment and the world of artifacts through these techniques. It's just the most recent one for another little startup company in Nagami, which was founded at the Bartlett recently. And I just wanted to share also, since this is not about our work, but I just came back to Cyprus, a project which is the embedding and encapsulating old historic moat and fortress walls in Cyprus, and have a new kind of public space, which is it's also aspects of interaction and fluidity and integration, embeddedness, the kind of potency and power of these repertoires we've been developing, delivering public space in a compelling way, where you could also initially feel a lot of resistance to such a project, and somebody needs to kind of have the nerve to kind of stay with it and stand with this and allow this to push through these obstacles, become kind of linear park and plaza in Cyprus, at the edge of this kind of fantastic ideal Renaissance city, which was created in Nicosia. I also wanted to show video. This is just integration of car and house, things we do exploring in DRL. So we're moving into this kind of inventiveness of strange new types which are up for grabs. And the car has been a stable type for 100 years, and now finally will suddenly dissolve and we have to be reconfigured. The villa and house apartment is a very, very stable element for the last 100 years, and now finally comes apart with things like co-living and subscription living. So we're working on these topics, and I find it fascinating. We're in this very, very disruptive, transformative era where a lot of things which are for granted we took for granted and eternal nearly are coming apart, and we have to become political as well, actually, to break through the barriers which hold back this, mostly through planners who hate all of that and can't deal with it. And again, the new aesthetics comes on the back of an aestheticization of the new high performance. Topology optimization structures, the versatility of configurations you can tie in with optimal solutions, and form finding is fascinating, so we're exploring that. And okay, so I'm calling this anti-humanism because what is humanism but the kind of preconception about human nature and what proper human life, sociality should be, and we have to overcome that. We have to be future open to find new degrees of freedom beyond that what we take as the natural. And of course, it's always the particulars of a particular era, the nuclear family we take family and kind of pattern of life we take for granted. It's been kind of in the industrialized West stable for 80, 100 years. We take this to be nature, but of course it isn't, it never was, and we need to push beyond that. So, and we need to relive that moment and make poetry out of these new potentials. I mean, there's a kind of proselytizing necessity, as well as an exploration necessity, as I said, aesthetic sensibilities. Marinetti in 1909, he took this car ride, and he loves these locomotives, railway stations, aeroplanes. I mean, they hardly existed at that time, and makes a kind of intense poetry and an exuberance of embracing the total transformation. And one, particularly in Italy, which he considers to be a kind of old professors, archaeologists, and tourists and antiquaries country, which has to be burst open through these new machines, through the mechanization of the city and of human life. And I also love this one by Hannes Meyer, who is, we know as a kind of most brutal rationalist, radical functionalist, but he was also a poet. There's a kind of an underlying poetry, because it's a culture war as well as an attempt to form convictions about future potentials. And he was celebrating all the new technological achievements and how they're changed. Ford and Rolls-Royce have burst open the core of the town, obliterating distance, etc. Now we have to get the car back out of the city again, and you're talking about walkability, etc., and connecting buildings and continuous interior urbanism. So these things change, and we need to relive this moment of transformation and poetic imagination. I think that's what designers are very, very good at in that, and being inspiring engineers and pushing the engineering, partly, if they're not doing it, through proto-engineering, but then pushing social functionality and social imagination forward. He was also into fashion. At that time, there was still national costumes and such. So Sartre was saying, man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. Such is the first principle of existentialism, and I agree with that, but it's also, of course, a social project, a collective project, and an individual project at the same time. It's kind of dialectic. And he was somehow talking about existentialism as still a humanism, but this spirit became the anti-humanist watchword of the next generation in France, postmodernists like Foucault, Derrida, etc. So he said existence precedes essence, which means he just rejects this idea of an essential human nature we kind of presume and have to kind of follow a kind of ideal conception we have to live out through our lives, preconceived, handed down, and that needs to be, of course, absolutely rejected and trashed and smashed. That doesn't mean that there aren't limits, psychological and otherwise, that there is some kind of base human nature, but we need to emphasize it holistically, and that's the heuristics of, I think, socio-political imagination, the open-endedness and malleability of conditions. Of course, we are not. There is some kind of base stratum we have to contend with, but where this is, nobody can know. But then the question again is that idea of voluntarism. You just want to be somebody else, something else, and of course you will find out quickly that you would kind of burn yourself and crash. So there are conditions, and there are ways which work and ways which do not work, and we need to do that through experimentation, trial and error, testing. And some people will burn themselves, some people will trailblaze and crash, and others find ways and lead the way for us to follow. So we have to be careful. And Marx is the one who was careful, and later on Sartre, in a sense also, in his kind of later, more Marxistly grounded periods, was realizing that these conditions are there, and they're often to do with cooperation with technology. So men make their own history, yes, but not in self-elective circumstances, and always kind of with what the past has thrown up to this point. You have to build on and see where this goes next. And the overall process is utterly unpredictable, but there are still rules and laws to be considered. So, and I think the evolutionary process, unpredictable and open-ended, but at the same time constrained, and there are certain rules and laws we can find there, but also cultural evolution, political evolution. And what is interesting, though, is about this notion of refunctionalizing this kind of surrealist situation, this détournement, is critical with respect to all evolutionary transformations, because we have that dialectic of exaptation and adaptation, which we need to talk about. So, and design is an artificial evolution, but also the whole cultural project where design interface as the kind of semi-conscious sub-aspect is an evolutionary process. It is also incredibly fertile, of course, to make artificial processes of evolution, genetic algorithms, evolutionary algorithms, to search these spaces for us. An enormous acceleration, similar to the acceleration we achieved when we went from direct experimentation with physical buildings onto the kind of simulation substrate of the drawing, starting with the Renaissance. Now we're having something else going with this kind of artificial evolution, the evolutionary processes, AI and all these things will be another huge acceleration for exploring the potentials. Because what the drawing didn't deliver was the fitness criteria embedded in it. You couldn't tease them out by just looking at a drawing. Some things you can appraise and draw. You can have geometric fit, etc. But many other things you can't appraise and test by looking at the drawing in front of you. And also to realize that all evolution is some kind of bricolage of bringing prior aspects together and trying out new combinations, the combinatorics game. And that's also the cyborg possibility. What do you attach to yourself? How do you attach yourself into networks, plug in? And this kind of moment of bricolage is very interesting and striking, symbolized here in Picasso's bull's head. This kind of situation is détournement, but it is also when we, for the first time, this kind of bricolage of modernism, instead of abstractly conceiving a city on the green field, on the white sheet of paper, Corbusier going in at the Algiers project and layering in and finding coastlines and existing structures and embedding and confronting that with its own reading, where these forms suddenly take on this interaction with the contours. They're fascinating. Project which came to fruition actually only decades later in its reoperation in deconstructivism. So what is creativity? Creativity is that play, that open confrontation, assemblage-like of different systems and tinkering and bricolaging and finding new ways. And so there's this element of mutation and recombination, and then the alertness with respect to selection for new utilization potentials and continuously seeing something as something else. Seeing that seat and other these bicycle elements as the bull's head. So, and this is exaptation and adaptation. So you confront, the exaptation is when you refunctionalize given structures which evolved or built up for certain purposes. You recontextualize them and put them into new purposes, and then you have a new kind of ontology, and you then go through gradual adaptation. So these kind of shocks of détournement. At that point you have pre-adaptive advances, elements which evolved under certain conditions, being shifted over into a new condition, and then you have this kind of shock of a new start of adaptive optimization. So, and this is with all our structures, even our biological structures. This kind of mouth, of course, is originally a kind of eating organ, teeth, lips, tongue. That's kind of chewing and eating and swallowing and also breathing. And all of this became later on refunctionalized as well, double and multifunctionalized as a speeching tool, which is incredibly potent and powerful. All these elements coming into new and double and triple function. The same was as our feet, of course, hands were of course originally feet. And they bear the trace, and they're kind of lumbered and kind of burdened by this, but also they then evolved into something quite agile and different. And this kind of refunctionalization set us free two aspects of becoming human, but I believe that we need many other instruments, cyborg-type instruments, tools, clothes and social differentiation, marcations, as well as built environment to become really human. But I just want to point out this element of détournement. You find it in technical innovations as well all the time. What is a railway system? It's a kind of steam engine which was in a factory, a carriage which was a horse drawn. You put steam engine onto carriage, you get a locomotive, and then you take rails. You're coming out of the mining, already in mining used for hundreds of years, to bring the rails together, and you have a railway potential, something which has been hugely transformative. There's these always kind of drawing together the things which had to evolve up to a certain point, otherwise they wouldn't be there, ready to be refunctionalized. And it's very important. And that's why you have the historical lineage of, as I said, the hand were feet, the wings were legs. But you also have this where the certain conditions pull whatever is there towards something. So there's kind of rules that you have. Flight evolves in very, very different beginning points. The bat wing, the butterfly, and the bird wing, they become very similar from very, very different roots. And the same with eyes. So you have this convergence of very different trajectories because the conditions also select. And there's the degree of predictability that mobile creatures will have to have certain sense organ, and the use of light and vision becomes potent, and who doesn't discover it doesn't have that agility and mobility and is falling behind. And we also discovered this light and using cameras and became very, very superior technology. So we have both homology, which is this kind of lineage where everything builds on what is there, as well as analogy where trajectories converge from very different starting points through the conditions. But the conditions are, of course, never stable. There's some, we have gravity, but maybe if you're moving on to the moon or Mars, that falls off. But these conditions are always evolving because conditions are often created collectively through the various organisms and life processes and technologies, which redirect evolutionary trajectories. And that's why we need to remain kind of in the spirit of cyborgs. But, so evolution goes in many, many directions. There are some points of convergence, but I claim it is always progress, nearly by necessity. Except when you have external shocks, when you have kind of mass extinctions, such conditions, kind of rapidly evolving ice age or things like this, then we don't have progress. But what we don't know how, where evolution is going. It's utterly unpredictable how it is achieving certain ends. But that it will improve it and will progress, and the later structure and organism is superior, is an a priori we can nearly rely on. And also, as you see, kind of vision. We can predict that a vision system has to be evolved by any agile organism. But a lot of people don't believe that. Progress is a myth for many. So is progress a myth? And I just want to give you some visuals to dispute that. Anyway, there are the philosophers of progress, which I subscribe to: Hegel, Marx, Weber, Habermas, and Luhmann, and then there are the skeptics and deniers of progress. Actually, curiously, Nietzsche in a strange way. Husserl, Heidegger, Foucault, Derrida, and there's debates, of course, across this line. So I want to invite you to join the philosophers of progress, because I find what's going on here very paralyzing. And there's kind of relativism, multicultural, the pluralism of styles. Anything goes, anything is equal. There's no moving forward, no qualification, no ranking, no. But that's very, very artificial. That's very decadent. I believe that. Finally, a claim of mine. But, I think it speaks for itself. So there is progress. There can't be any doubt about this. And, we need to be conscious of this, where we've reached, which is stunning. I mean, you can decide to go to Australia and having a few nice meals and a bunch of new movies and have a nice nap, and then you appear kind of elegantly on the scene. I mean, that's what we've reached. That's material freedom, that's empowerment, that's potency, that's prosperity, which is compelling. So there is progress. I mean, this guy would never had made it to Australia. He made it kind of 100 meters and then he died. You're not going to die if you do it. And this is progress too. Come on, give me a break. And this too, evidently. So yes. But is there teleology? Is there kind of a preconceived past? Are there laws of history? That's a much more tricky one. I mean, I would say it's been denied and castigated, and I don't think it is. But in biological evolution, it has been kind of supplanted by teleonomy, because it's kind of causally. We know the mechanism by which things evolve. But the convergences I've talked about with vision systems, for instance, and the evolution of semiotic system, of communication, of the power of social cooperation in the animal kingdom, and many other, and all human societies, there are, given some kind of semi-stable conditions, there are certain laws of history we can defend and talk about, and Marx was into them. And progress, yes, overall, yes, but no guarantee. There could also be these external shocks, these contingencies. Yes, we did have, extinction, we had ecological collapse, we had decadence, we had historical decline, the decline of the Roman Empire. I mean, this is a big challenge of history. Weber had a hypothesis, Mises had an hypothesis, I'm interested. And the other quest of history is kind of to understand the rise of the West, for instance. So teleology is an open question, and I'm fascinated by this because it's also to do with you have that open exploration of the cyborg and the kind of artistic creation, but can there be guidance, can there be rules, can we cut off some of the waste of those people who burn themselves in futile self-exhaustion? And so are there laws of history? I don't know, but I find this inspirational. Hegel says the real is the rational. So he's tracing human history, and he thinks, he's trying to make sense of it. In retrospect, you can construct progress out of this. And so the history of the world presents to us a rational process. This conviction and intuition is a hypothesis in the domain of history as such. Actually, you have to have that as an historical researcher. There must be, otherwise there's no story to tell. Really, you have the hypothesis of a rational progress, an explanation. And he thought philosophy can be beyond this. He was actually kind of metaphysically committed to some God-given destiny. But it's interesting the way he chapters of his lectures on the philosophy of history. But also I think where he was maybe hitting it as well quite right. By the way, the real is irrational. You can take this on every instant. It's a very long-run, broad perspective. You can't use it to justify everything which is real and has a raison d'être which is kind of unquestionable. No, of course not. Particularly, there's a lot of inertia in human institutions where they hang on far too long and therefore become increasingly irrational and fetters on the further development of the force of production, to use Marx's term. So, but he had and he had this one to say. So the destiny of the spiritual world and the final cause of the world at large, I would say of the social political world, will reach to be the consciousness of its own freedom on the part of spirit, and ipso facto reality of that freedom. Great inspirational notion. I don't believe that it is always fully a conscious pursuit, but pursuit of freedom and degrees of freedom as the freedom of discovery, of movement, of adapting, is a life principle which is one of the laws of history to some extent. But we need to look at this in context of an overall material freedom. So if you look at Marx, so it's again trying to say, is that kind of existential self-projection of us and mankind, has that some kind of constraint, some kind of law, some kind of conditions at various stages of reproduction? And you can see that these kind of stages are on the one hand, technological stages as the ultimate drivers, and then socio-political, institutional stages which map onto this. And it is interesting that these conditions reoccurred independently at various different parts of the world, independent societal formation which survived, picked up, conditions like slavery, the building of states, feudalism, etc. This one only happened in the West, and that was the unbelievable takeoff point. And there's been a big kind of discussion. Historians since the 19th century about why and how this happened, why wasn't it happening in China, what was holding it back, how was capitalism possible, and there's also kind of détournement aspect in this. Because the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism by Weber is showing that. And the strange effects of something like Protestantism in unleashing something like capitalism. But there are many factors come into play, so it's difficult to predict. But once it was discovered, it becomes obviously compelling. And as Marx said, the cheapness of the commodities, so the material freedom was battering down all the Chinese walls of this world, and this kind of mode of life, and let's say in the 20th century, America kind of ripped across the planet with an inevitability which I hope our culture of computational design, engineering, and architecture will eventually do as well. So freedom and emancipation, something we should go by, is initially, that's very important, the material freedom. We need to look at performance, and it's initially the increasing liberation from the material necessities and impositions of a different physical universe, so that we can live longer, better, that we don't have this kind of bone-breaking drudgery, precarious exposure to the vicissitudes of nature, but instead elegantly zip over to Australia and more or less can look forward to kind of 80 years of elegant life on Earth, which was 300 years ago was a different matter. It was an average of kind of 30 and bone-breakingly brutal. So, but the other one is social freedom, so the increasing liberation from the necessity of social discipline imposed by a cooperative conquering of material freedom. So that is the other one we can look at emancipation, and architecture is also involved in that. Architecture is part of both, of course, but we need to be clear, so we have prosperity and we have liberty, and I think that material freedom is primary and compelling, and it shows up in economic growth, and we will be willing to take degrees of self-disciplining, of being part of a moral code and cooperative rules and institutions which lock in to some extent individual freedom to participate in that material freedom. But what is beautiful, the congeniality, that the degrees of freedom and self-directedness which push material freedom forward are strikingly the new era of post-Fordist restructuring. I mean, the way our lives are kind of freed from these Fordist bureaucracies and the creativity and self-imagination, the individualism which is thrust upon us is striking and is a wonderful coincidence. At one stage, slavery was necessary here, and now we have kind of what becomes necessary, that you actually take charge of your very individual trajectory and freedom. And it is, you would kind of be dysfunctional if you continuously wait for being instructed or told what to do. So, just as a quick hint, I don't want to go through it, that the architectural styles, epochal styles, tie in also with these eras of socioeconomic institutions, political institutions, which tie in with technologies of reproduction, material reproduction. And that in the end, the protagonist of social self-transformation of the human project is in some sense society itself, although it's made up more and more of individualist heroes and protectors. It's kind of Leviathan. It's interesting that the social cooperation society, Leviathan, the social body is connected in this image, which is a frontispiece of Hobbes' famous Leviathan, with an architecture. So it's clear that the architecture is the substrate, the organizing prosthetics of society, and society in its cooperative potency is a true engine of history. So the city as augmenting prosthesis. And I just want to walk through that there's this kind of transformation. I showed you earlier the various aesthetic ideals and subjectivities of humanity, the evolution of cars, and there's an evolution of the built environment, which goes, you can see here, I'm always tying up the style with the socio-economic kind of era, and you can walk through with different aesthetic sensibilities, with different subjectivities, with different components and elements and aspects. And the latest transformation was recognized with post-tourism, deconstructivism, and parametrism. And it's problematic that a lot of our discipline is kind of falling back to this stage or falling back behind at the minimalist modernist stage. And it's kind of refusing to participate in progress. And so we need to develop that lust for complexity. I mean, that's not the final answer, but it is certainly something which challenges minimalism, and postmodernism, deconstructivism are in a sense aesthetizations of that. That's the way you have to understand the kind of Liebeskind drawing. He was onto something, because that's where reality kind of was driving towards. And the same with this kind of collage city, the bricolage sensibility, that kind of openness, the new degrees of freedom. But then the attempt to give another layer of orderedness to this, to overcome the disorienting, menacing visual chaos which was entailed. The early sketch which we did collectively at Columbia University in 93, for instance. And again, a new sociality, when you move from Fordism, modernism to post-Fordism, and the question is really, what does it mean for architecture, building, city, but also for the individual? The individual is now not locked into a particular department with the same identity, but it's the intersection of many dynamically shifting and changing social circles, and the individuality is so much higher because we're all different. We all have different networks. And Georg Simmel, already 100 years ago, as a sociologist, was defining that heightened sense of individuality is not something which comes through from the inside. It's not our gray matter up here, which is different. They're very, very similar. We're just evolving differently because they're individualized in thousands of different places, where here there's kind of 5 social places, there are kind of as many social places as there are individual trajectories through this. So we have to move and shift our subjectivity from the left to the right, and the takeoff of China as a prosperity engine and leading world economic superpower shows up in this too, because this society cannot produce that. So we have patchwork, patch life, and again we need to look at artists, and you need to re-evolve, you need to reinvent, and you're in multiple lives at the same time. And Madonna was the one which kind of expressed that, starting in the early 80s. Kind of every few years, we should learn from that. I mean, okay, finally, just a few more things, and we need to learn to live with robots, and not only and we need to accept them as our companions. You work with them already, and as they become more AI infused, more spontaneous, it challenges us again in our self-conception, our sensitivities, and our moral sensibilities. And there is something we've conceived this already in 1999. We had this idea of responsive environment and robotic environments, and I remember Neil's Future Cities conference, and my article was called Robotic Fields. So we're on to this for quite a while. And living with robots, living with machine, with intelligent machine, they're becoming spontaneous, creative, They develop their life histories through encounters. They become individuals, irreplaceable. So that means also we kind of start to interact with them. And depending if their intelligence is more diffused in the web, you actually can't reproduce them. You can't download and reproduce them. They become irreplaceable individuals, participants in our life process, and deserve our respect. So we do have something, and these are kind of roaming around in a differentiated fitness landscape and in various engagements. And we've kind of experimented, this was also nearly 20 years ago, with these interactive pieces of furniture which challenge us, which probe us, which randomly generate offerings, which are then kind of trained up to be doing more or less of this, but remaining spontaneous. And we do need, and I find this book quite fascinating, I've looked at this recently, and it's a burgeoning study in the humanities, robot ethics. So we're talking about aesthetic sensibilities, moral sensibilities, and they will include a new sense of interacting with machines, through machines, who we are and who they are, inverted commas, welcoming them in. And if you do want freedom and spontaneity in your robotic tools, as much as I want freedom and spontaneity and counter challenge in my workers, my teammates, and my colleagues. And the same I would want to as a kind of, so it's not like, I think Wen was saying earlier, it's kind of execution only. No, they're kind of co-designers, they're creative challengers and colleagues, and develop maybe an intelligence larger than ourselves. I'm not afraid of this, I welcome this, because I want to discover what the human project, and now it's a kind of a cyborg project, and the robotics plus humans project can become in the future. And we've kind of been speculating and simulating this. But are there limits to our psychological plasticity? Can we actually fall in love with these strange creatures? And actually I was quite fascinated by Ex Machina, where I thought this girl was pretty beautiful and cute and interesting. But that relies on a lot of human markers, and then we can dress them up like this. But there was also strangeness in that character, with this kind of glass head and so on. So I think there is something, a question here, but also a challenge to us, which designers can help bring forth to overcome. Maybe there are, of course, some psychological limits to what kind of social life you can have. How alien can you go? And this is from DRL, with some of Theo's unit playing and toying with all sorts of creatures and behaviors, behavioral ecologies, as we call it, and I think that's something useful to start to reflect and explore. And the beautiful thing here is that architecture becomes alive. They become agents, actors, active agents. They not necessarily need to be bodies loose, but they congregate and become spaces interactive, responsive environment, and they have their own kind of sensors, actuators, intelligence, learning capacity, etc., etc. I mean, it's a wonderful world. It's a fascinating world, and are we ready to live amongst such creatures? Lots and lots of those. And the stranger the better. And I don't need to be humanoid. I mean, that's constraining if you just have a second person. And I think AI is not about mimicking and imitating human thought process and intelligence anymore. It is otherworldly in a way of embrace. So that future openness of an otherworldly computational intelligence, which is also going to be distributed across whole networks, etc., etc. I'm just utterly fascinated by this. So this is kind of self-building, self-aggregating, self-transforming structures, robotic structures, with kind of low-level, great intelligence each unit, and swarm intelligence, etc. How are we doing in time? Should I wrap it up? Or maybe I think I stop here. Thanks for the attention. And maybe we can discuss.
So I think we're going to have to wrap this up here. I know there are lots of questions that would have been asked. We're running over an hour late, so I'd just like to thank Pat. Pat has been incredibly supportive of our events here, and not only he, because he can, but also Sharjah and the rest of the team from the office. And it's great to have him now on board as a supervisor of the PhD program here. So I'd like to thank Patrick. I'd also like to thank Philip, but there's a huge team that you're probably aware of who will facilitate this event today, and I'd like to thank them wherever they are working behind the scenes. And thank you also for you guys for coming. Thank you.